Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about frequency and histograms. So we're going to learn what those two things are, and our objectives for today are to create stem and leaf plots and to create frequency tables and histograms. Let's start off with stem and leaf plots. So a stem and leaf plot arranges data by dividing each value or each data value into two parts. So if we had a data value of 23, our 23 would be broken up in a stem and leaf plot to look like this. We'd have a box for the 2 and a box for the 3. The 2, or anything that isn't the last digit, is going to be what we call our stem. And our 3, or our last digit, is going to be called our leaf. Challenge number 1 is to make a stem and leaf plot for the following data. We have a bunch of numbers given to us, and we have to create a stem and leaf plot to organize it. So the first thing I'm going to do, and the first thing I want you to do, is organize these numbers from least to greatest. All right. And it's always good if you have a lot of numbers to kind of count up how many numbers you have and make sure that your numerical order includes all of them. All right, so now we have to make this stem and leaf plot. So I'm going to label this chart here, this T chart, with stem and leaves. And the stems are going to be anything that are not my last digits. So let's see, I have numbers that are single digits, so they're tens places, or anything other than that ones place is a 0. I also have a bunch of numbers in the teens, so those are going to have a stem of 1. I have a 1 in the tens place. And I have numbers with 2s, so those are my 20s, and I have numbers in the 30s, so I'm going to have a stem of 3. Now my leaves, I'm going to write on their own, so I'm going to help myself and kind of separate off where my different sections end. So I have 0s, 10s, 20s, and 30s. This makes it a little easier to look at. So now, with my leaves, I'm just going to write 9 for my ones place here. And in my tens and teens, I have 2, that comes from 12, 4, which comes from 14, and I have 2 18s. So that's going to be 8 and 8. And you can just separate these by leaving a space between them. You can also put a comma, that's okay. And my stem for 20s, I have 3, 4, 4, 5. And in my 30s, I have 32 and 34. So that's 2 and 4. All right, so here's a stem and leaf plot that shows me my data in this form. And this is kind of useful because it tells me how many of each data point I have. So in the 10s and the 20s, I have more data points than in my 1s and my 30s. It's a nice way to organize it. Okay, let's talk about frequency. So the frequency of a data value is the number of times it occurs. And a frequency table shows the frequency of each value, so how often each value appears. A histogram is basically a visual representation of this frequency. It's a bar graph, so this is bar graph. A histogram is a bar graph used to display the frequency of data divided into equal intervals. So let's see what those look like. In number 2, we're given the final scores from a golf tournament. We're asked to make a frequency table out of this data and a histogram out of this data. So the first thing before we do either of these that I want you to do is organize these numbers in numerical order. All right, now that I have that done, we can create our frequency table. So if you look at this frequency table, we have a few things going on. In the left column, we have scores, so the scores of the golf game. And these are in intervals. We have 68 to 70, that's 3 numbers. 71 to 73, that's 3 numbers again. And different intervals of 3 numbers all the way down. So now, our job is pretty easy. All we have to do is count up how many scores are in each interval. So from the interval 68 to 70, how many scores do we have up here in that interval? Well, we have 68, 70, and 70. So that's 3. So I would put a 3 here for frequency, or how many times they occur. For 71 to 73, I have 71, 72, 71, and 72. So that's 3 again. 74 to 76, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 scores. 77 to 79, I have 1, 2, And for 80 to 82, I have 1. Always a good idea to count up your data points and count up your frequencies to see that you have the same number. Now we can use this data to make a histogram. So a histogram is going to look a lot like a bar chart, but all we're going to do is have some ranges or some intervals down here of our scores on our x-axis and the frequency on our y-axis. So I want you to always label everything. So we want to label our graph first. Okay, now I've labeled my graph. I have my different intervals down here. So 68 to 70, 71 to 73, and so on. And I call those scores. On my y-axis, I have my frequency. That's how many times each of these occur. So now I'm just going to graph using my data table. So the thing with histograms is that there are no spaces between the bars because these are intervals. They should cover every possible value we have. So in the interval 68 to 70, I have 3 values. So I'm going to go up to 3, and I'm going to create a bar here. It's going to look something like this. Then for 71 to 73, I'll use a different color. I'm going to put it right up next to that other bar in red. And from 71 to 73, I also have 3 values. So this is going to look like this. And then I'll switch back to red maybe. From 74 to 76, I have 4 values. So I'm going to put it right up next to the 71 to 73 one. And from 77 to 79, I have 2 values, so that goes back down to 2. And for 80 to 82, I only have 1. So that's going to look like this. And that is my histogram. It shows me how my data falls across a certain interval of numbers. All right, so let's move on to the last part of today's lesson. The last thing we're going to learn about today are two-way frequency tables. So a two-way frequency table is a frequency table with 2 variables. So this is variables here. And this is what a two-way frequency table looks like. We have 2 different things going on. So imagine somebody gave a survey to different students about whether they played a sport and whether they played an instrument. In this column, these columns here, you can see whether a student plays a sport or not. And in these rows, you can see whether they play an instrument or not. In the rows that correspond to each one, we can see whether students play both a sport or an instrument, or neither a sport nor an instrument. So in this particular cell right there, 8 is the number of students who both play a sport and play an instrument. But if we move over here, 3 tells us that 3 students do not play a sport, but they do play an instrument. If we go down to the bottom here, these are our totals. Also, to the right, we have our totals. So the total number of of students who play sports is 10. And the total number of students who do not play sports is 8. If you look down this way, we have the total number of students who play instruments and the total number who do not play instruments. That's 7. And the total down here is the total. That's like the total number of students we interviewed. So you'll see that 10 plus 8 is 18, and 11 plus 7 is 18. This should always happen. You should always have these 2 sums be the same. Let's look at what we can do with this table. Our third question is, what ratio of students play a sport but do not play an instrument? So let's use our table to find this. Well, here's the column for the students who play sports, and here's the row for students who do not play instruments. So we're going to need to zero in on this number right here. That's the number of students who play a sport and do not play an instrument. So that's going to be 2 out of how many? Well, we're kind of looking at the total number of students here. What ratio of students in general play a sport but do not play an instrument? So the total number of students is 18. This ratio can be reduced to 1 over 9. So our ratio of students who play a sport and do not play an instrument is 1 out of 9. 1 to 9. Last question. What ratio of students do not play a sport? So this is just all the students who don't play a sport. It has nothing to do with the instrument or not. So all of the students who do not play sports can be found down here. The total is 8. So this is going to be 8 out of our total number of students, which is 18. 8 out of 18 can be reduced to 4 out of 9. So 4 to 9 students do not play a sport. All right, with that, we are finished. Thanks for watching.